the shadows of Hong Kong's glittering skyline lies a story of survival, a stark reality where retirees, workers, and families are confined to spaces smaller than a parking spot. The housing crisis isn't just about homes, it's a battle of inequality, desperation, and broken promises. Will the government's ambitious plans deliver hope, or will thousands remain trapped in coffin homes? This is a fight for dignity in the world's most unaffordable city, where every square foot is a battlefield. Hong Kong, a city that never sleeps, where neon lights kiss the sky and every corner hums with life. Known as the Pearl of the Orient, Hong Kong is a tourist's paradise. In 2023, over 33.9 million visitors marveled at its iconic skyline, bustling streets, and vibrant culture. But behind this glittering facade lies a dark, suffocating secret. A secret so shocking, it might make you question everything you know about this city. In its prime, Hong Kong welcomed 55.91 million tourists in 2019, ranking among the top travel destinations in the world. Its shopping districts overflowed with visitors, and its Michelin-starred restaurants were packed to the brim. But then came 2020. And everything changed. Tourism plummeted to 3.57 million, a 94% drop due to the pandemic. The streets emptied, businesses closed, and for the first time, the city felt the strain of its hidden cracks. But while tourists came and went, an unseen population remained, a staggering 200,000 residents trapped in coffin homes. These are not homes in the traditional sense. Imagine paying HKD 2,500 per month, about USD 318, for a space no bigger than a grave. A place where you can't stand upright, stretch your legs, or breathe freely. These aren't homes, they're human cages. The origins of this nightmare date back to the 1950s, a turbulent time when Hong Kong faced an unprecedented refugee crisis. As the Chinese Civil War raged, millions fled to the city, swelling its population from 600,000 to 2.1 million in just 5 years. With no infrastructure to support this surge, makeshift metal cages were erected as temporary homes. But what was meant to be a short-term solution became a permanent stain on Hong Kong's housing history. In the following decades, the government made efforts to address the crisis. By building 40-story public housing complexes, they provided over 780,000 units of subsidized housing. For just HKD 2,500 per month, families could live in spacious apartments far removed from the squalor of coffin homes. But there was a catch, a devastating one. The waiting list for public housing stretched far beyond what anyone could endure. Promised a home within 3 years, most applicants waited an average of 6 years. For some, the wait never ended. Imagine working a 10-hour shift only to return to a space the size of your office cubicle. For these residents, life is a daily struggle against indignity. They share bathrooms, kitchens, and even the air they breathe. For many, lying down means curling into a fetal position, their knees pressed against metal bars, and all of this for a price that rivals an entire apartment in some cities. In 2018, the government introduced a new idea, transitional homes. These 290 square feet container modules were designed to bridge the gap while people waited for public housing. But at HKD 3,000 per month, they were more expensive than coffin homes and less subsidized. By 2021, only 2,000 units had been built, despite promises to construct 16,000 by mid-2023. Once again, the government's promises fell short. How can a city that draws millions of tourists every year ignore the plight of its people? How can a government that spends billions on infrastructure allow 200,000 of its residents to live in such dehumanizing conditions? The answer lies in a tangled web of bureaucracy, corruption, and neglect, a system designed to favor wealth over welfare. The most heartbreaking victims of this crisis are the elderly and children. For them, the coffin home isn't just a living space, it's a prison, a daily reminder of a system that has failed them. These are not just numbers, they are human beings, stripped of dignity, waiting for a better tomorrow that may never come. a city trapped in tiny spaces. Imagine this, 50% of residents already live in public housing, yet the demand remains insatiable. How does a city balance its shining image of wealth with the heart-wrenching sight of coffin homes? And what does it say about those in power? According to the 2020 government survey, only 7% of Hong Kong's land, a mere 79 square kilometers, is designated for residential purposes. What about the rest? Most of it is preserved as country parks, wetlands, and marine parks. While the lush greenery is admirable, it raises one unsettling question. Are the forests worth more than the people? With no large-scale development plans and government reluctance to expand residential zones, housing prices soar unchecked. By 2021, the cost of a 300-square-foot developer-built apartment hovered around USD 500,000, while government-subsidized housing, though cheaper, remained out of reach for many. The crushing irony? Public housing costs HKD 2,500 per month, the same price as a coffin home. How did it come to this? To understand the crisis, we must revisit the 1950s, when Hong Kong's population exploded from 600,000 to 2.1 million in just 5 years, driven by refugees fleeing the Chinese Civil War. To house the influx, makeshift cage homes were born. Metal bunk beds enclosed in thin wire. Temporary shelters became permanent prisons. Fast forward to today, and the problem persists. John Lee, Hong Kong's new chief executive, claims to prioritize housing by selling more land for development. But will it be enough? Critics argue that land sales are a double-edged sword, as they fund 30% of the government's income. Keeping land scarce drives up developer bids, inflating prices further. Meet Kay, a 60-year-old cleaner who earns HKD 500 daily. He spends nearly all of it on his bedbug-infested coffin home, a 20-square-foot cubicle shared with 14 tenants. With temperatures reaching the high 90s and 85% humidity, his room lacks air conditioning, adding yet another layer of misery. Kay faces a decade-long wait for public housing. His response to government announcements about minimum living standards: a defeated shrug. It is what it is. I didn't have high expectations anyway. The government announced a plan to phase out low-quality homes, but activists remain skeptical. Organizations like SOCO, Society for Community Organization, push for stricter regulations to register all subdivided units, including coffin homes. They demand a phased ban on such inhumane dwellings and the repeal of outdated laws like the Bed Spaces Apartments Ordinance of 1994, a regulation that, astonishingly, legalized coffin homes. Beijing's directive to eradicate inadequate housing by 2049 looms over the city, but will it lead to meaningful change? Or is it merely a pipe dream? Meanwhile, activists like Soko and residents like Kay continue their fight, hoping for a future where dignity is not a privilege, but a right. Paradox of housing policies. Despite widespread acknowledgement from civil society organizations, including the Society for Community Organization, SOCIO, that coffin homes epitomize the city's inadequate housing crisis, the government has refused to classify them as subdivided flats. Grassroots housing activist Kenny Yang from the Kwai Chung Subdivided Flat Residents Alliance has openly criticized the decision, stating, "The government says it wants to eradicate low-quality subdivided units, yet it ignores the reality of coffin homes, which are far worse." For tenants like Sammy Hui, the precarious nature of housing in Hong Kong is an ongoing battle. Sammy, a stock trader in Tai Kok Tsui, rents a 60-square-foot subdivided unit after being evicted from his previous 400-square-foot flat in Lam Tin. The transition was a harsh blow, leaving him with limited options in the city's fiercely competitive housing market. The government insists that landlords will be incentivized to upgrade subdivided units to meet new standards, but critics like Deputy Financial Secretary Michael Wong admit that the supply of such units will not see a drastic decline. Worse, landlords may exploit loopholes to convert their subdivided units into bed space apartments, using the Bed Spaces Ordinance as legal cover. Assistant Professor Chan Xiuming of City University highlights a grim reality. Tenants will likely be forced out while landlords make repairs, which could take months. Without proper resettlement measures, many may end up homeless, or worse, in coffin homes. Assistant Professor Chan warns that even the introduction of higher standards for subdivided units could result in unintended consequences. If tenants are displaced without affordable alternatives, the government will have created a new crisis rather than solving the existing one. SOCO, meanwhile, continues to advocate for stronger inspection regimes and stricter penalties for landlords who violate housing standards. However, the fear of retaliation and eviction prevents many tenants from speaking out. Housing crisis, the people, the promises, and the pain. The residents of Hong Kong's subdivided flats are a stark reflection of the city's growing inequality. They are retirees, the working poor, drug addicts, and individuals battling mental illnesses, those unable to keep pace with the spiraling cost of housing in one of the world's most expensive cities. Ranked as the world's most unaffordable city for the 14th consecutive year by survey company Demographia, Hong Kong also bears the weight of one of the highest rates of inequality worldwide. In October 2024, Hong Kong vowed to adopt new laws to establish minimum space and safety norms for subdivided flats, where residents endure living spaces averaging just 65 square feet, half the size of a sedan parking spot. John Lee, the city's leader, emphasized the importance of regulating the market to ensure housing meets what he called a reasonable and livable standard. Hong Kong aims to eliminate subdivided flats by 2049, a target set in 2021 by China's top official overseeing the city. This goal is tied to Beijing's recognition of housing woes as a serious social issue, one that fueled the 2019 mass anti-government protests. Authorities plan to increase the supply of public housing to shorten waiting times, which currently stretch up to 5.5 years. The Housing Bureau has identified enough land to build 308,000 public housing units over the next decade, a step toward alleviating the city's housing crisis. Since July 2022, over 49,000 applicants have been housed in public rental housing. Additionally, approximately 18,400 units of transitional housing have been made available for immediate and short-term accommodation. The Housing Bureau stated that eradicating substandard subdivided units is at the top of the government's agenda. But the question remains, will these measures be enough to bridge the gap between promises and reality? But despite these efforts, critics remain unconvinced. The goal of eliminating subdivided flats by 2049 may seem far-fetched given the government's historical inability to address the crisis effectively. As housing activists and tenants know all too well, such promises often fall short, leaving the most vulnerable members of society to suffer in overcrowded, unsafe, and increasingly unaffordable conditions. Join the conversation and uncover the truth behind Hong Kong's housing crisis. Subscribe to Mystery Media now, and let's shine a light on the stories that matter, because change begins with awareness. Don't miss a single chapter.